Hello, my name's Chantal Macleod-Nolan. I'm here to talk to you about some life recovery projects, so I hope you enjoy. So why did we need a species recovery project for roseate terns and also little terns? Well, both of which are species of conservation concern. The roseate tern is red listed while the little tern is amber listed. And unfortunately, the situation as it is, roseate terns have a very restricted range. Historically, they went through one of the most severe population declines. Back in the 19th century, they were actually persecuted for their plumage during the millinery trade. They've recovered somewhat, but unfortunately proceeded to decline again. And in 1989, there were only 467 pairs left in the UK and Ireland. The population has recovered from that, though. However, it is still very restricted, with only 3 main breeding colonies, and as a result, this project was focused on trying to boost the population and help it expand. The Little Tern project, the Little Tern is, as I mentioned, amber listed. They also have very niche habitat requirements, very short foraging range, and as they nest on sandy and shingle substrate on the beaches or in similar areas like that, they encounter quite a lot of disturbance from both human as well as predation, as well as habitat squeeze and increased competition for nesting space. So the projects came about, really important partnership projects, and as a result, they were part funded by the EU Life Grant, which was brilliant. So this is where the projects covered. Red was the direct areas of where they were able to do work with the funding, and then of course you've got the other aspects where we improved communications between sites outside of the projects. In this case, for example, sharing best practice on management, and then of course we have an annual newsletter for both of these species, which we aim to keep this momentum going even though the life projects have now ended. And we've also, with networking, we've established links with key partners in Europe. So that was very useful as well, because you can't think of little terns and roseate terns as just one colony. You've got to think of them as a meta-population. So this is just to show you where the roseate terns nested and their figures last year. The project focused on the 3 main colonies, of course. You've also got the ones in orange, which is where we were hoping to improve the sites for future recolonization. And as you can see, the Skerries and Wales have had 1 or 2 breeding pairs of roseate terns, which was fantastic news. With Larnloch holding the last remaining roseate tern pair, by the way, in Northern Ireland. So we worked very hard during the project to restore the island, which had been flooding, and as a result it benefited not just roseates but also sandwich terns and black-headed gulls. I won't go into this much, but I know that people will be aware of the AI situation. Obviously it's been a problem for our roseates on Coquet. This is just showing you where the stronghold is. So Rockabill, of course, supports the largest proportion of the population, but it's been a really severe loss to hear about the fact that some of our roseate terns have died on Coquet. So this year will be very interesting to find out the impact of that, but we are aware that we lost a large proportion of the adults on Coquet, and the productivity was also its lowest since 1985. But I will say, just to say that I've talked about the fact that we've got these 2 projects, and I'll talk about a third one in a minute. This was only, thanks to our amazing team of staff and volunteers that really, we were able to achieve some of the successes through these projects, protecting these birds on the ground as well as behind the desks, because, it's a really tough job and it's a partnership project. So we were working across multiple organizations, and of course you've got multiple sites to deal with different issues. So just to put this in perspective, the Little Tern Life Project recruited more than 60 seasonal wardens and project officers during the 5 years, and they helped monitor and protect the terns nesting on the beaches. And then you've also got our amazing volunteers, and we had over 250 that did the vital work on these tern colonies, and they made such a difference because of course they helped with the habitat work, they helped with the monitoring, they helped with the people engagement. So yeah, I just wanted to give a shout out and say thank you. And they're still continuing to do this, by the way, because although the project's ended, these volunteers and staff are just continuing to protect these species. So protection. So on site, you've got situations where we were putting up fencing. Some of it's rope fencing to try and deter public from walking on our little tern colonies, and that's because they're very well camouflaged, as you can see by this picture. Fencing also included like electric fencing, both semi-permanent and permanent, depending on the site conditions, and that was to prevent mammalian predation. And then of course you've got signage, which helped inform the public on what we were doing and why. Other things we were doing was also trying to improve the conditions of the sites. So this is sand patches, for example, and also where sites were not as suitable due to flooding or other issues such as predation, we would try and use terns and lures to try and attract them to a slightly safer area. For roseate terns, they like to nest in crevices, so nest boxes were introduced quite a long time ago, and this has been a very effective way of protecting and helping these terns. So installing more of these and creating more of these terraces, which has all these nest boxes, has been one of the key things that have been done, and also improving like the hides, and that was useful for like monitoring and night shifts. This one is now able to do 360-degree movement, which is useful when the weather, of course, changes. And also the fact that we're working with roseates, but then you've got little terns and all the nesting species also in the vicinity of these different species. So for common terns, we were creating more of these shelters which protect their chicks from avian predation, so there's less competition for the common terns to try and use the nest boxes, because their chicks might try and use them for shelter as well. So predation, I just mentioned a couple of examples of fencing. So we've also got other things. So we've got night wardens, we've got bait to try and protect islands. So this is where really useful to have a biosecurity plan. Then also you've got things like an agri-laser, which was a 2-year laser hazing study to see if we could try and deter gulls and crows. And these are like really useful for monitoring and we try and do non-lethal measures, because of course they're all trying to survive, and we. Sorry, moved that too quickly. But yeah, so we're trying to use non-lethal measures to protect the colonies. Moving on quickly, just to say that we have, during the Roseate Tern project, we wanted to get a better understanding of the movements and what was really, fueling the populations on the respective islands. And this paper, used data from ringing and resighting from these 3 colonies. And as a result, we got a very good demography paper, giving us a really good understanding of the population growth rate for each colony. So as you can see here, what's really important, of course, is immigration for some of the sites such as Coquet and Ladies Island Lake, whereas Rockabill, it's really adult survival and productivity. So just to say, in recent years, because the survival of juveniles from that were born on Coquet, basically there had been more and more Coquet-born birds breeding on Coquet. The actual proportion had changed slightly, so it was becoming more self-sustaining, because immigration is very important, but it showed in previous years that the population was becoming more self-sustaining, which would be very good for Coquet should anything happen to the other sites. Obviously, we will have to take into account the effects of AI, but that's something we won't know until, again, in the next couple of years. This is the paper. I'm afraid I can't. It's a whistle-stop tour, but this is if you're interested in learning more about the metapopulation dynamics, I suggest you check it out. Very interesting. And yeah, going to roseate terns, just to say, one of the things, of course, was focusing on where we would work for recolonization. So we looked at the priority areas, and the boxes identify where it would be for focusing our efforts to improve the common tern colonies, which of course roseate terns nest among, and then of course having a better understanding of their foraging and of course their key food sources. So these are the areas that were highlighted at the end of the Roseate Tern project. So I mentioned networking, and this is just to give you some examples, because of course, as I said, they don't understand borders. So in some areas it's really useful we work, but we need to keep the communication between colonies, because obviously people are coming up with new solutions, and you can see here the bottom picture in France, they were installing nest boxes to see if that would improve their roseate tern population. And generally just sharing ideas is really useful. So this is just an example of a map. So the source is Sustainable Shores, which focused on surveying the habitat loss, and basically it was an assessment where they also identified, through mapping, opportunities. But this just gives you an idea of why it's so important that we look into restoring parts of the coastline for some of our tern species. Which brings me on to the Third Life project, which is a 4-year project. It's halfway through, and it's focused on restoring key sites and basically improving their long-term resilience with regards to climate change. So the project species are not just terns, it's also other species such as breeding waders like ring plover, oystercatcher, redshank, but also wintering species which will be using the same habitats. And basically it's very much focused on improving these sites and then tackling the issues such as disturbance as well. So it all ties in well with the previous projects. So this is the project sites. They are again based in England. These ones we're working with lots of different partners. So some of them are like Harwich Haven Authority. You've got Cumbria Wildlife Trust, Natural England, National Trust, Bird Aware Solent, Environment Agency. And this has been really useful because, as I mentioned, it's habitat based. So in this case, in Hodbarrow and Cumbria, we were looking at the creation of a 0.5 hectare new island, which, as you can see on the left, and then extending the existing one, which is over by the right, and then putting in fencing to protect it from mammalian predation. So to say that yes, the extension was successful. We had common terns using it in the first year, 1 or 2, and then last year apparently more of them were using them, and it was a good number. So fantastic sign for creating more nesting space. Another example is Titchwell Marsh. So Titchwell focuses on not just the coast, this project, but also on like freshwater habitats, which will benefit a range of breeding and wintering species. So this basically focused on creating 12 islands for birds to use, but also improving the condition of the freshwater marsh and reed bed, so water control structures and reed removal. So it's a really good sign for multiple species, because after doing this work they had one of the best years in 10 years with bitterns nesting area apparently in pools that they had in the pool that they had extended. The reed bed held great white, egrets, grey herons, and then avocets had a peak count of 97 pairs with lots of chick visible, and 3 pairs of common terns, which is the first time in 10 years. So it just shows how important it is to kind of make these sites and keep them fresh and dynamic. Another example was our recharge project. It's a flagship one in Horsey. It's using dredge material to restore an eroding shingle bank, and it's a very important site for little terns in Essex, because it's their main site. It's their main site for little terns, and it will also provide more protection for the grazing marsh, which is very important for breeding waders. So as you can see here, this is the work being done to bring the dredge material onto the shingle bank area, and this is a map. This is this shows you what it was beforehand, and then once the substrate had been deposited. And yeah, so the great news, last year we had little terns making use of the new habitat with 14 nests on the new shingle area and a further 8 nests on the existing bank. So fantastic sign. Just to say, we're also working on beach nesting birds programs, so we're working with local communities and visitors in Cumbria and the Solent, to raise awareness and protect beach nesting birds. So yeah, it's a really exciting project, And of course, we're working and linking in with other beach nesting birds programs and mitigation schemes. So this involves linking in with like what we've done before with the previous projects, such as producing interpretation materials, best practice examples as well. And we've done also webinars, for example, to again share knowledge between organisations and countries which have, the similar species that we're trying to protect. And of course, our long-term strategy is that we'll continue to work with these statutory agencies and other NGOs, and basically we'll identify where we'd like to work next. Of course, what future flagship beneficial use of dredged material projects we can find, of course, and then with the legacy is basically where we would, like to work in the future. And yeah, I would just like to say thank you. That was a very short, overview of the project. So I'm sure there were things that I wasn't able to mention, but hopefully that was enough to pique your interest. And yeah, if you'd like to find out more, feel free to contact us. Life in the Edge is running for another 2 years, and we are still continuing with the legacy work of the Little Tern and the Roseate Tern project, even though the actual projects have ended. And as I said, this was a partnership. This is a partnership, not just me. And so I'd like to again say thank you to everyone, and of course the Life program for their funding. Thanks very much.